Western allies have been trying to maintain a united front against Russian President Vladimir Putin, but Slovakia, an EU and NATO member state, is sending mixed signals. Slovakian Prime Minister Robert Fico has a friendly relationship with Russian President Vladimir Putin. In fact, besides Hungary's now former Prime Minister Viktor Orban, Fico is one of the rare EU leaders to maintain close ties with Moscow. Since Orban's defeat in Hungary's recent elections, could Fico take up the role of the EU's most problematic leader? And could Russia still maintain its influence within the bloc through Slovakia? Fico recently met with Putin in Moscow. This is how our expert guest described the visit.
It was not strategy, it was a comedy.
Alright, so it's not a serious geopolitical shift, just some theatrics, according to our guest Alexander Duleba. He's a senior fellow at the Slovak Foreign Policy Association. So let's jump in.
Because it's already the third trip to Moscow to celebrate the victory in the World War II, Soviet Union's victory. It was a tragedy for the European Union in terms of EU policies and EU relations with Russia. But this year it was just comedy.
But why does Alexander call it a comedy? Could it have something to do with the fact that Slovakia, along with Hungary, had been blocking a €90 billion EU loan package for Ukraine before giving in and lifting its veto?
For Russians, it was very important, to stop the decision within the European Union to simply to agree this 90 billion euros loan for Ukraine, because actually this is a key decision of the European Union, which really makes a different dynamics in the war. Fico, during the the election campaign in Hungary, he publicly declared that if it might happen that Orban will lose the elections in Hungary, he will raise the flag and simply will block the law. He did not. When they met with Putin in Kremlin, the first question of Putin to him, I'm sure I was not there present during the meeting, but I can imagine when Putin asked him, what you promised to block it, you did not. This was the key the top priority interest of Russia from, the sort of, their allies within the European Union. So this is my argument that Fico will not deliver to Russians what Orban was delivering.
So what is Robert Fico's relationship like with Vladimir Putin? Is the Slovakian Prime Minister someone the Russian president can rely on?
Putin cannot trust Fico the same way as he did, in case of Orban. Fico is not an Orban. Fico will not deliver to Russians what they expect, from their allies within the European Union to block these strategic decisions. And this was the test case. On one side, Fico publicly declared he will block the decision. He did not.
And what about among European leaders? Viktor Orban caused many headaches in Brussels, but is Fico causing the same trouble?
Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, who said after the Orban lost the elections in Hungary, that Fico will not do the same things. He's a pragmatist. He's a very pragmatic sort of the politician. We have good relations. I can talk to him, and I'm sure that he will not block the key EU decisions. So Western allies of Slovakia should understood nature of this Fico policy. I think that it's really addressed to domestic electorate. So it's a tragedy for Slovakia that actually, so we are losing trust in the West, we are losing, and even Putin doesn't trust Fico. He's not like a real ally of Fico. He doesn't have allies, abroad. Orban was a leader of this sort of the policy in the European. He's a pragmatist. He understands that the source of economic welfare and the situation in Slovakia fully depends on the functional European Union.
Right, we'll pick up on Slovakia's dependence on the EU in a bit, but first, let's look at the domestic pressures facing Fico. Is he just playing to his supporters at home, and where does broad sentiment within the country lie?
It's the question sounds not why Fico is doing in foreign policy what he does, but rather why his electorate here in Slovakia wants him to do things he does in foreign policy. Let me just explain that around third of Slovak electorate, so around 30%. So I call them, this is as anti-system electorate, which supports this anti-system. I call it anti-system policy because they want to, they think that autocratic regime in Slovakia would be more efficient than the democratic regime. The EU is a bad thing. Our membership in NATO does not bring benefits and so, but Slovakia is not exception here. And I think in other European countries, including in Germany and other European countries, we have these portions of anti-system electorate.
Let's take a closer look at the pro-Russian supporters. Why do Fico's voters hold Moscow in such high regard?
Slovak nationalism is traditionally pro-Russian, which makes it completely, different, clearly different to the Polish or Ukrainian nationalism. So therefore, this is a priori positive understanding of Russia, which was, I think, my argument here is that rather Slovaks invented their own Russia, which is not a real Russia, but it's a Slovak Russia. Russia invented in our national expectations. So we expect, this one third of electorate and Fico, because this is, so he has some competitors there, but he dominates. And he understands that only mobilizing, this electorate will simply keep him at power in Slovakia.
But parliamentary elections aren't taking place in Slovakia until next year. So is Fico already working towards being voted into office again?
What I observe is that the election campaign already started and Fico is fighting, So we are quite polarized society in terms of political preferences. So we have then on the other side, so those 50%, almost 50%, 46, 47, following the public polls, in Slovakia, so they support democracy, they support European Union. They clearly understand that Russia is aggressor, Ukraine is a victim. We need to help this victim. And so this is let's simplify it, pro-Western or pro-European voters. Then we have the 30% around now. Those who are anti-system voters, who are against democratic regime, against Ukraine, for Putin, for Russia as a sort of alternative to the European Union or whatever. And the second problem is that we have those undecided, so around 20% of undecided voters who do not have a view in which country they want to live, what they prefer in foreign policy. Fico simply has to be a pro-Russian, in order to mobilize those voters.
Slovakia became a member of the European Union in 2004. Its economy has grown significantly since then. So how much leverage does the EU have with Slovakia?
Slovakia is the second country which benefits most from the single market. It's almost 20% of Slovak GDP annually is generated just because of the fact that we are part of the single market. The national interest of Slovakia is to cultivate this European Union, to contribute, to finding consensus, and simply it is in our vital interest simply to have a functional European Union.
The fact remains that Fico remains on friendly terms with Moscow, while at the same time playing an active role within the EU and NATO. So, should Brussels be concerned of what he could become within the bloc?
He's a risk, but not serious risk, not such a risk as Orban might be. He's a quite pragmatic politician. He understands where are the economic sources of development of Slovakia and the welfare of Slovakia is not a real threat for the European Union or NATO. Slovakia, at the end, will be not the first, the most active, whatever, but still it will follow the main decisions done by, agreed by allies within European Union and NATO.
So is Robert Fico the EU's most disruptive leader? He's certainly one of the bloc's most unpredictable and the most Russia-friendly. So should the EU be concerned about Fico and his ties with the Kremlin? What do you think? Let us know in the comments. I'm Pablo Foley-Elias. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.